February 12, 1943. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands. The air was thick with humidity and the smell of burnt fuel. Mechanics in stained flight suits swarmed over a strange-looking fighter parked at the end of the airstrip. Its nose long, its wings bent downward like a predatory bird about to strike. To the Marines watching, it didn't look right. It looked angry. The plane was the Vought F4U Corsair, the newest American fighter to reach the South Pacific. Its dark blue paint shimmered under the morning sun. The massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine idling with a deep, throaty growl. At over 2,000 horsepower, it was the most powerful engine ever bolted to a single-seat fighter. But for the men who flew it, that power came at a price. "We call it the Ensign Eliminator," one mechanic muttered as the pilot climbed in. "Kills more rookies than the Japs do." The Corsair had a reputation. Fast, fierce, and almost impossible to land on an aircraft carrier. Its long nose blocked the pilot's view on final approach. More than one had slammed into a flight deck or bounced clean into the sea. Navy test pilots were nervous. Some said the design was cursed, but the Marines didn't have the luxury of superstition. Guadalcanal was still contested, the skies crawling with Mitsubishi A6M-0s. Agile, graceful fighters that had dominated since Pearl Harbor. The Corsair was their answer. From the revetment, Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh of VMF 124 adjusted his oxygen mask. He'd flown Wildcats before. Solid planes, but slow. This new machine, he was told, could hit over 400 miles per hour and climb like nothing else in the Pacific. "Well," he said to his crew chief, grinning under the sweat, "let's see if she bites." The propellers spun to full throttle, the sound shaking the palm trees. The Corsair roared down the coral strip and lifted off, wheels folding neatly into the inverted wings. Up above, Japanese spotters from Rabaul Air Base took notice. The Americans were fielding something new. One pilot, Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, reportedly laughed when he saw the first reports. "A bent-winged bird? It must fly like a drunk pelican." He would learn soon enough that the bent-winged bird was a predator unlike anything the Empire had faced. At 15,000 feet, Walsh leveled out. The Corsair's controls were heavy, but the engine's power was intoxicating. The altimeter spun like a clock gone mad. He could feel the torque tug at the wings, but the speed was unlike anything he'd ever flown. Then his radio crackled. "Bandits inbound. 10 zeros, 2 o'clock high." Walsh pushed the throttle forward. The Corsair screamed into a climb that no Wildcat could have survived. He rolled inverted, dove through the formation, and opened fire. 6 50-caliber Browning machine guns erupted from the wings, tracers slicing through the sky. 1 0 exploded in a burst of flame. Another spiraled down, trailing smoke. The Japanese pilots were shocked. The big American fighter dove faster, climbed harder, and could take punishment that shredded a Zero to pieces. For the first time in the Pacific War, the hunters had become the hunted. As Walsh banked through the clouds, he radioed back to base. "Tell the boys, she flies like a dream, but you've got to treat her mean." Below, the burning wrecks of Zeros fell into the jungle. And far away in Rabaul, Japanese intelligence officers circled the new aircraft on reconnaissance photos. They scribbled its name in disbelief. Corsair. They didn't know it yet, but this ungainly bent-wing monster would soon own the Pacific sky. April 1943. Rabaul Air Base, New Britain. The humid air above Rabaul shimmered with the heat of idling engines. Rows of A6M-0s gleamed silver under the Pacific sun as pilots of the Tainan Air Group lounged beneath the wings, smoking and laughing. Word had spread fast. The Americans had introduced a new fighter. "Another heavy pig," one pilot said, waving his cigarette dismissively. "Probably slower than their Wildcat." Others chuckled. They had reason to. For nearly 2 years, Japanese pilots had ruled the skies from Java to Guadalcanal. Their Zero, light, agile, and razor-sharp in a turn, had humbled every Allied fighter it met. The new American machine, with its odd inverted gull wings, looked clumsy by comparison. Veteran ace Lieutenant Saburo Sakai, credited with over 60 kills, studied a reconnaissance photo of the strange aircraft pinned to a map board. "That wing design is ridiculous," he said flatly. "It's for show, not for speed." But the laughter wouldn't last. Across the sea on Espiritu Santo, Marines of VMF 124 were preparing to strike Bougainville. Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh, now a seasoned Corsair pilot, leaned against the nose of his F4U-1, its black and white shark mouth freshly painted. The ground crew called it Whistling Death, not for its looks, but for the eerie scream the airflow made through its engine vents during dives. Walsh smirked. "If the Japs don't hear me coming," he said, strapping on his helmet, "they'll sure as hell hear me leaving." At 8:20, 18 Corsairs lifted off in formation, their wingtips glittering like blades against the blue. Within minutes, they were climbing through the clouds at 3,000 feet per minute, powered by the throaty roar of the double Wasp engines. As they neared Bougainville, radar reported incoming bogies, 25 Zeros, sweeping in from Rabaul. The two formations sighted each other at 17,000 feet. The Japanese broke formation first, splitting into climbing and diving groups, their usual tactic: lure the heavy Americans into a turning fight. But when they turned, the Corsairs didn't follow. They climbed instead, almost vertically, engines howling. "Impossible!" shouted one Japanese wingman over the intercom. "They climb like thunderbolts." The Corsairs rolled inverted and dove back down, guns blazing. Walsh lined up a Zero in his sights and squeezed the trigger. 6 Brownings stitched across its fuselage, and the plane erupted into a fireball. He pulled up sharply, the G-forces pressing him into the seat. Through his canopy, he caught glimpses of the chaos below. Japanese pilots scattering, trying to turn inside the American fighters. But the Corsairs were too fast. Even when the Zeros managed to hit, the Corsairs absorbed punishment at the lightweight Japanese aircraft could never survive. Walsh's wingman, Second Lieutenant Robert Owens, took a burst across his right wing, smoke trailing, but his aircraft held firm. "Still with you, Ken," he called. "Let's show him what this hog can do." By the time the dogfight ended, the Marines had downed 11 enemy aircraft for the loss of 2 Corsairs. At Rabaul, stunned Japanese pilots returned to base, silent and shaken. One finally muttered, "The Americans have a new devil. It climbs faster than we dive." Japanese intelligence officers studied the combat reports. The mysterious bent-wing fighter, once mocked as a design flaw, was now a terror. They named it the Whistling Death. The irony was not lost on them. Back at Espiritu Santo, as the Corsairs touched down, ground crews counted the holes in their wings, dozens in each. None had failed. Walsh climbed out, his face streaked with sweat and oil, and patted the scarred fuselage. "You can laugh all you want," he said quietly, "but this bird, she bites." Over the next months, the Corsairs' kill tally would skyrocket. The Japanese aces who once ruled the Pacific began to fall, one by one, to the machine they had laughed at. The skies were changing. The age of the Zero was ending. Whistling Death, August 1943. Over the Solomon Islands, the sky above Vella La Vella was burning. Corsairs from VMF 214, better known as the Black Sheep Squadron, thundered through the clouds in tight formation. Blue phantoms hunting silver shadows. Their leader, Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington, adjusted his oxygen mask and scanned the horizon. "Keep your eyes open, boys." His voice crackled over the radio. "They'll come screaming out of the sun. They always do." Bermut, far above, the Japanese had already spotted them. 20 Zeros from Rabaul's 204th Kokutai, diving in perfect formation, sunlight flashing off their wings. To the Japanese pilots, the sight of the gull-winged Corsairs below was still strange. They had once joked that the Americans were flying bent birds. Now, they joked no longer. Boyington rolled his Corsair into a steep climb. The R-2800 double Wasp engine growled as the big fighter surged upward, climbing straight into the attack. His 650 caliber Brownings opened up, hammering the air with glowing tracers. A Zero exploded into a cloud of debris, gone before its pilot even knew he'd been hit. "Splash one," Boyington shouted. "Form up and climb. Keep your altitude." The radio filled with the staccato chaos of aerial combat. Call signs, warnings, screams, and static. One Marine yelled, "Watch your 6, they're on you." Another shouted back, "I see him, I see him," before his transmission cut short. Through it all, the Corsairs ruled the sky. Japanese pilots quickly discovered that their once unbeatable A6M-0 was outmatched. The Corsair could dive faster, climb higher, and outgun them at every turn. Even its design quirks, the long nose, the inverted wings, gave it surprising advantages in stability and speed. In the words of one captured Japanese pilot, "The blue fighter comes from nowhere. You think you have him. Then he's above you, behind you, everywhere." Boyington's squadron tore through the formation, their engines screaming like banshees. The distinct high-pitched whistle, caused by air rushing through the Corsair's intercooler ducts, echoed across the sky. Japanese survivors would later remember it vividly. "It was a terrible sound," one wrote. "You heard it before you died." By the end of the engagement, VMF 214 had shot down 15 Zeros. The Corsairs returned to base, their dark blue fuselages riddled with bullet holes, their pilots grinning with exhaustion. Boyington climbed down from his cockpit, sweat streaming down his face, and laughed as his crew chief handed him a canteen. "How's the new hog treat you, Pappy?" the mechanic asked. "Like a woman with claws," Boyington replied. "Mean as hell, but you can't stop loving her." At Rabaul, the mood was grim. The Japanese command could no longer deny the truth. The Zero's supremacy had ended. Reports described the new American fighter as superior in all aspects save maneuverability, and its pilots fearless, aggressive, and unshakable. They had laughed at the Corsair's design. Now, they feared its shadow. Across the Pacific, from the Solomons to the Marshalls, Marine Corsair squadrons gained a fearsome reputation. The Japanese began to avoid air-to-air combat unless they held overwhelming numbers. Still, it didn't matter. The Corsairs kept coming. Blue death from the sea. At Henderson Field, after the day's victory tally was written on the chalkboard, Boyington sat on an ammo crate, staring at the sunset. Around him, ground crews patched bullet holes and wiped soot from the Corsair's shark-mouthed noses. He said quietly to one of his men, "You know, they used to laugh at this thing, called it ugly, dangerous to fly." He glanced up at his plane, its wingtips still glinting in the fading light. ugly or not," he said, lighting a cigarette. "She's winning us the war." Above them, the Corsair's silhouette cut across the orange sky, that unmistakable bent-winged shape. No longer a joke, no longer a prototype. It was now the master of the Pacific. February 16th, 1944. Over Truk Lagoon, Caroline Islands. The dawn came red, not with sunrise, but with fire. The sky above Truk Lagoon, Japan's Gibraltar of the Pacific, was a storm of smoke trails, tracer fire, and burning ships. Dozens of Corsairs dove through clouds of flak, their gull wings cutting through the chaos like blades. Below them, the once invincible Japanese naval base was dying. From the cockpit of his F4U 1A, Lieutenant Ira Ike Kepford of VF-17, the Jolly Rogers, rolled into a dive, sun glinting off the skull and crossbones painted on his cowling. His target, a formation of Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo bombers trying to flee north. "Lead, this is Blue 2, came his wingman's voice. "You got a whole nest of 'em at your 11 o'clock. "I see 'em," Kepford replied. "Let's go fishing." He pushed the throttle forward. The R-2800 engine roared to life, the Corsair diving past 400 mm. His .650 caliber Brownings blazed, tearing through the bomber's formation. One Japanese plane burst into flames, spiraling toward the lagoon below. Another tried to bank away, too slow. Kepford's tracers walked up its fuselage until the wings folded inward like paper. The sky filled with radio chatter, calm, coordinated, lethal. "Bandit on your 6, Blue Leader." "Roger, I've got him. Break right. I'll clean him off." For every Japanese plane destroyed, another Corsair swept in to take its place in the fight. Down below, explosions rippled across Truk's anchorage. Oil tanks burned, cruisers capsized, and the once proud combined fleet was scattered in ruins. Japanese gunners fired blindly into the smoke. But the Corsairs came from everywhere, shrieking through the flak with that unearthly whistle that had earned them their name. It sounded like death screaming, one Japanese survivor later recalled. "We called them the Blue Demons." By noon, the battle was over. In a single day, U.S. carrier aircraft, many of them Corsairs flying from Marine and Navy squadrons, had destroyed over 250 Japanese aircraft and 40 ships. Truk was no longer a fortress. It was a graveyard. Back aboard the USS Bunker Hill, Kepford landed with the precision of a surgeon. The Corsair's early carrier troubles had been conquered. Through tweaks to the landing gear and training reforms, the Navy had finally tamed the beast once called the Ensign Eliminator. On the flight deck, as crewmen refueled his plane, Kepford pulled off his helmet and ran a hand through his sweat-soaked hair. "How's she feel now?" asked his deck chief. Kepford grinned, patting the side of the dark blue fuselage. "Like a thoroughbred that finally learned who's holding the reins." In the ready room later, pilots crowded around a chalkboard filled with kill marks. The mood was jubilant, almost disbelieving. The Corsair had gone from an unwanted experiment to the deadliest fighter in the Pacific. Faster than the Zero, tougher than the Hellcat, and loved by every Marine and Navy pilot who survived their first landing in one. From Rabaul to Okinawa, Japanese intelligence reports all told the same story. The enemy's bent-wing fighter dominates the sky. Even veteran Zero aces found themselves outpaced and outgunned. They had once mocked the Corsair's design. Now they dreaded its silhouette, the black gull swooping from the sun. In one intercepted message, a Japanese squadron leader warned his men, "Do not engage the blue fighters in climbing combat. They are faster, higher, and will destroy you." It was no longer a duel of equal skill. The war in the air had turned. By 1945, the Corsair had achieved a kill ratio of 11 to 1. Over the Pacific, it became the undisputed ruler of the skies. The Marines' guardian angel. The Japanese pilot's final nightmare. As victory neared, old hands like Boyington, Walsh, and Kepford knew they were flying legends. The plane that once killed inexperienced pilots now carried them to immortality. When the last mission ended and the airfields fell silent, a few Corsairs were left baking under the Pacific sun. Their paint faded, their tires sinking into the coral sand. A Japanese officer, walking through a captured base after the surrender, stopped to study one. Its bent wings cast a long shadow across the runway. He ran a hand along its cool metal surface and whispered, almost reverently, "The Americans built a monster, and they learned how to ride it." The Corsair, born in doubt, mocked in its youth, feared in its prime, had become more than a machine. It was a symbol of adaptation, of mastery, of the brutal ingenuity of war. And in the end, as the Pacific fell silent, one truth remained unshakable. The gull-winged demon had conquered the skies it was once too wild to land upon.